They called her useless, a runt, wolfless, a girl who smelled of cold ash and dead air, fit only to scrub the floors and bleed in the dark. For her whole life, she believed them. She knelt in the wreckage of a hall gone red with slaughter, claw marks torn across her shoulder, fever burning silver beneath her skin. A monster lunged for her through the smoke. She threw up her thin arms. She closed her eyes. She waited for the end she had always somehow known was coming. But the end never came, because the thing that had slept inside her chest for 18 years, the thing they had cursed and caged and called a sickness, finally opened its eyes, and the most feared king on the continent, the warlord who had knelt to no one, was about to fall to his knees. The cage was cracking, and the whole world was about to learn what they had buried. Winter never asked permission in the high country. It came down from the peaks, like something alive, settling over the stone walls of the Red Creek Keep, pressing cold into every crack and every breath. The wolves here knew the cold. They wore it like a second coat. They ran beneath the full moon with fur thick as snowdrift, and they called the mountain theirs. All of them but one. Her name was Wren, and in the eyes of the pack, she was nothing at all. She moved through the lower halls before dawn, a thin shape in a thin wool dress, hauling water that had half frozen in the bucket. Her hands had stopped feeling the cold years ago, or maybe they had simply stopped complaining, knowing no one would listen. The other wolves did not look at her. That was the kindest thing they did. When they did look, their lips curled, because Wren did not smell like them. A wolf was supposed to carry the scent of earth and pine and living warmth. That was the smell of belonging, the smell of a soul with a beast inside it. Wren smelled of cold ash, of burnt air after lightning, a dead, empty scent that made their noses wrinkle and their throats tighten, as if her very breath was an insult to nature. They had a word for what she was: runt, wolfless, and the cruelest one of all, useless. She had been born into this, born to a father who once held a small rank in the pack before he died in a skirmish at the borderlands and left her with nothing. No name worth keeping, no protection. The Alpha had stripped her family title the same week they buried what little of her father came home. Her mother, no one spoke of her mother, only that she had walked into the deep woods the night Wren was born, and the woods had never given her back. So Wren grew up in the spaces no one wanted: the cellar, the stables, the cold corner of the kitchen where the fire never quite reached. She scrubbed floors until her fingers split. She carried wood until her shoulders ached. And she learned, very young, how to make herself small, how to be a shadow that did not ask for anything. But shadows have secrets too, because something was wrong inside Wren, something that had nothing to do with being weak. It came at night, always at night, when the moon swelled full and silver over the peaks, and the pack spilled out into the snow to shift and howl and run. Wren would crawl into the dark of the stables and curl against the cold stone, shaking. A fever would rise in her like a tide. Her bones would ache as if something inside them was trying to wake up. Her chest would burn, a slow, heavy pressure right beneath the ribs, like a fist closing around a flame. And then her veins would glow. A faint silver light threading up her arms beneath the skin, soft as moonlight caught in water. She did not understand it. She never had. So she did the only thing she knew. She buried her arms in straw and dirt, pressed her face to the floor, and waited for it to pass. She told no one. Who would she tell? They already thought she was cursed. The old healer had said it once, in a low voice that Wren was never meant to hear, that the girl carried something stale in her blood, something wrong, and Wren believed her. She believed she was broken, a cracked vessel waiting to finally shatter. She did not know the truth. She did not know that the pressure in her chest was not a sickness at all. It was a cage, something ancient, something sleeping, something so old and so vast that the world had forgotten it was ever real. And someone, long ago, had locked it deep inside her with a mother's dying magic, hoping it would stay quiet forever. It would not stay quiet much longer. The morning the trouble began did not feel different at first. It was the noise that gave it away. The keep, usually cold and silent in the gray hours, had come awake all at once, doors slamming, voices sharp with fear, boots on stone. Wren paused at the bottom of the kitchen stairs, the empty bucket loose in her hands, and listened. A name moved through the halls, like a cold wind. The Alpha King. He was coming. Wren knew the stories. Everyone did. He was the one who had taken 100 scattered packs and forged them into a single kingdom through nothing but strength and will. A warlord. A legend with a beast so large the ground was said to tremble when he ran. And lately, whispers had followed him. That the king had grown restless. That the beast inside him was slipping its leash, turning wild and dangerous, because he had no mate to steady it. No anchor. No queen. They said he was searching now, riding through the northern lands, looking for the one soul in all the world fated to belong to him. Wren felt nothing but dread. A king meant danger for a girl like her. A king with a sharp nose and sharper temper. If he caught even a trace of her dead, ashen scent in his hall, there was no telling what he would do. Better to disappear. Better to be a shadow, the way she always had. So she did not see him arrive, but he felt her long before he ever saw her face. Far up the mountain road, wrapped in furs and silence, the Alpha King rode at the head of his guard, and he was not thinking of treaties or tithes or the cold. He was thinking of how tired he was. Thorn had stopped sleeping days ago, maybe longer. The beast beneath his skin paced without end now, restless and snarling, rejecting every face the world put in front of him. Each empty week pulled the leash a little thinner. Each cold night brought the madness a little closer. He had begun to wonder if a mate even existed for a man like him. If perhaps he had been made wrong, made to conquer, and nothing else. And then the wind shifted. It came off the high stone walls of the keep, faint beneath the smoke and the snow and the heavy animal warmth of the pack. A thread of something he had no name for. Sharp, cold, like the air just before lightning splits the sky. His horse stopped without being told. The beast inside him went utterly still. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the pacing ceased. The snarling quieted. Every part of him turned toward that scent like a compass finding north. Every nerve suddenly awake and reaching. His captain, Bram, glanced over, reading the change in him at once. My king? Thorn did not answer. He could not have explained it if he tried. He only knew that somewhere behind those cold gray walls, something was waiting. Something the world had been hiding from him. A scent that did not belong to any wolf he had ever met, and yet pulled at him with a force that made his chest ache. Mine. The thought rose from somewhere deep, somewhere older than words, and it would not be argued with. He did not know her face. He did not know her name. He did not know she was, at that very moment, hiding in the dark of a cellar, praying he would leave quickly and never look her way. He only knew one thing, with a certainty that frightened even him. Someone in there was calling him, and he was already lost. The gates of the keep groaned open below, and winter held its breath. By nightfall, the keep had become someone else entirely. The cold gray walls that Wren knew so well had been scrubbed and draped and lit, until the place no longer felt like home or prison, but like a stage. Torches blazed in every bracket. Long tables groaned under more food than the pack saw in a hard month. Banners hung from the rafters, hiding the cracks in the stone the way a smile hides a lie. All of it for one man. And in the middle of the storm of preparation stood Sloane. The Alpha's daughter moved through the halls like she already wore a crown. Golden-haired, golden-eyed, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, right up until it cuts you. She had decided somewhere in her own mind that the king had come for her, that a wolf as fine as she could be destined for nothing less than a throne, and so the keep would be perfect, which meant Wren would not sleep. For 3 days and 3 nights, Sloane had worked her like an animal, mending gowns, hanging tapestries, hauling, scrubbing, polishing, carrying. Wren's hands had gone raw. Her eyes burned. The fever that always came with the moon was creeping in early this time, a low heat under her skin, a faint silver ache she kept hidden beneath her sleeves. She did not complain. Complaining was a luxury for people who were allowed to be heard. She simply moved, and she stayed out of sight, which was the only skill the pack had ever let her master. But the keep was crowded now, and shadows are harder to find when every corner blazes with light. It happened near the great hearth, where Sloane stood admiring herself in a polished silver tray, draped in a velvet cloak the color of deep wine. Wren passed behind her, carrying a hot iron from the pressing table, her arms trembling from exhaustion she could no longer hide. Her foot caught the edge of a flagstone, just barely. The iron dipped in her grip, and the heat of it kissed the air a breath away from the velvet. It never touched the cloak, but Sloane spun anyway, and her eyes went bright with something that had been waiting all night for an excuse. "You," she breathed. Wren stepped back, lowered her head, made herself small the way she always did. It did not matter. Sloane's hand moved faster than thought. Claws slid free, catching the torchlight, and then there was a sound Wren knew far too well, the wet tearing of skin. 3 lines opened across her shoulder, deep, ragged, burning. Wren did not cry out. She had learned long ago that her pain only fed them. She pressed her palm to the wound and felt the warmth spill between her fingers, and she stayed silent. Sloane wiped her claws clean on a cloth, slow and satisfied. "Listen to me, runt." Her voice dropped low, so the celebrating wolves beyond would not hear. "The king is here. A real wolf. A real king. And you are not going to ruin this." She leaned in close. Her perfume was thick and floral, and beneath it, Wren could smell the cruelty, sharp as iron. You will go down to the cellar. You will stay there in the dark until he leaves. And if his majesty catches even one breath of that dead, rotten scent you carry. She smiled. I will tear your throat out myself and feed what's left to the hounds. Wren said nothing. There was nothing to say. There never was. She only nodded once, swallowed the taste of blood and shame, and turned toward the stairs that led down into the cold. Behind her, the music swelled. The laughter rose. The pack welcomed their king into the light. And Wren walked down into the dark, where they had always preferred her to be. The cellar was black and bitter and silent. She lowered herself onto the freezing stone, drew her knees up, and pressed her bleeding shoulder against the cold to dull the burn. The fever pulsed through her in slow waves now, the silver light flickering faint beneath her skin, and she shut her eyes and willed it down. Stay quiet, she told the thing inside her chest. Please, just a little longer. Above her, through the heavy timbers, she could feel the keep alive with celebration. Feet stamping, cups ringing. 100 wolves drunk on the honor of a royal visit. And somewhere, up there, him, the king. She did not let herself think about him. A girl like her had no business thinking about a man like that. He was made of strength and certainty and everything the pack had decided she would never have. So she pressed her face to the stone and waited to be forgotten. She did not know that 2 floors above her, the most dangerous man in the realm had stopped being able to think. The great hall roared around Thorn, and he heard none of it. He sat at the high table like a storm held inside a man's shape, broad and scarred and still, watching the celebration with eyes the color of a bruised midnight sky. Beside him, the alpha of Red Creek sweated and fawned and refilled his cup. Across the hall, Golden Sloan laughed too loudly at things he had not said, leaning toward him in wine-colored velvet, pouring his drink with hands that lingered. He did not see her. He did not see any of them, because the scent was here, closer now, stronger, threaded all through this loud, bright room, beneath the roasted meat and the spilled ale, and the cheap, heavy perfume of the Alpha's daughter. That same thread of lightning and cold ash that had stopped his horse on the mountain road. It curled into him with every breath and would not let go. His beast had risen to the surface and stayed there, ears pricked, utterly silent, listening, not pacing, not snarling. For the first time in longer than Thorn could name, the great restless thing inside him was calm, and it was hunting. Where? The word beat through him like a second pulse. Where is she? Because it was a she. Of that he had no doubt. The pull was too deep, too certain, too much like coming home to a place he had never been. Every instinct he owned bent toward that scent, like a flower toward a sun it could not see. My king. The Alpha leaned in, oily and eager. Is the wine not to your liking? We have older casks, the finest in the north, kept just for... Quiet. The word was soft. It still landed like a blow. The Alpha shrank back. Thorn breathed in again, slow and deep, and let the scent fill him completely. It was wrong, what it did to him. A king did not lose himself. A king did not sit in a stranger's hall with his heart hammering like a green boy's, searching the crowd for a face he had never seen. And yet, there was grief in that scent. He could taste it now that he was paying attention. Grief and pain and something else, something buried so deep it ached just to be near it. A power so old and so quiet that his beast did not bristle against it the way it bristled against rivals. It bowed toward it. That frightened him more than anything had in years. "Mine," the beast said again, low and sure. "Find her." His gaze swept the hall, past the dancers, past the drunk and the fawning, past Sloane, who mistook the movement of his eyes for interest and preened. He looked for a face that matched the ache in his chest, and he did not find one, and the not finding was its own kind of pain. Bram, standing at his shoulder, leaned in low. "You've been somewhere else all evening," the captain murmured, voice pitched for the king alone. "What is it?" Thorne's jaw tightened. "There's someone here," he said. Bram followed his gaze across the crowded hall and saw only the celebration. "Half the North is here, my king." "No." Thorne shook his head once, slow. "Someone they're hiding." The certainty in his own voice unsettled him. He had no proof, only a scent and a pull, and a beast that had gone quiet for the first time in weeks. Because somewhere beneath this loud and gilded room, the other half of him was breathing. He almost rose, almost crossed the hall himself, tore through every door and every shadow until he found the source of that maddening, grieving, glorious scent. But a king could not simply bolt from a feast like a man possessed. Not yet. Not in front of a pack that already whispered about his fraying control. So he stayed, hands flat on the table, every muscle held still by will alone. And he waited. Down in the dark, Wren felt the strangest thing. A warmth, faint at first, easy to mistake for the fever. But this was different. It did not come from inside her bones. It came from somewhere above, somewhere far, reaching down through the cold stone and the heavy timbers like a hand searching in the night. She lifted her head. The silver light beneath her skin had begun to glow a little brighter, pulsing now, almost eager, as if it had heard something. As if it were answering a call she could not hear. She pressed both hands flat to her chest and felt her heart pounding against her ribs, hard and quick, for no reason she could name. "Stop," she whispered to it. "Stop it, please." But the warmth only grew, and for one dizzying moment, alone in the dark with blood drying on her shoulder, Wren felt something she had never once felt in all her years at Red Creek. The sense of being noticed, not hated, not used, not stepped over like a stain on the floor. Noticed, as if somewhere in all that vast cold world, a single soul had turned and was looking for her. The thought terrified her more than Sloane's claws ever had, because hope was the one thing she had never been allowed to keep. Hope was what got runts killed. She squeezed her eyes shut and forced the warmth down, down, down into the dark with her, and told herself it was nothing. A fever dream. A trick of the cold. It was not real. It could not be. People like her did not get to be found. 2 floors above, the king's hand curled slowly into a fist on the table. He had caught it again. That flare. Stronger this time. A bright pulse in the scent that made his breath catch and his beast surge toward the floorboards. She had stirred. He felt it. He did not understand how. Only that he did. The way he understood the beat of his own heart. She was close. So close. He turned his head, just slightly, toward the far corner of the hall where the servants' stairs descended into the dark, and something low and certain settled in his chest, like a vow taking shape before he had the words for it. Whoever she was, wherever they had hidden her, he was going to find her, and the storm in him, the madness, the long cold hunger of a king with no one to come home to. For the first time, it had a direction. The cellar door opened with a bang that shook the dust from the rafters. Wren flinched awake, not knowing she had drifted off. The cold had crept deep into her bones while she slept. Her shoulder had gone stiff, the dried blood pulling tight against her skin every time she breathed. A wide shape filled the doorway at the top of the stairs. The head cook, red-faced, sweating, frantic. Up, get up, girl, now. Wren pushed herself off the stone, swaying. The world tilted, then righted itself. I'm not allowed to be seen, she said. Sloane said, I don't care what she said. The cook was already turning, beckoning with one thick arm. Half my servers are drunk or hiding under the tables. The king's guard wants meat at the lower benches, and they want it now. You think I'm walking into that hall short-handed because some girl is scared of a scratch? Move. Wren's stomach dropped. The hall, the light, the crowd, him. Every warning in her body screamed at once. The fever pulsed harder, the silver glow flickering beneath her sleeves, and she pressed her arms tight against her sides to smother it before he could see. Please, she tried, one last time. Her voice came out thin. If he smells me, if the king smells what I am, he'll smell roast venison and nothing else. The cook shoved a heavy iron platter into her arms before she could argue, piled high and steaming. Lower tables, head down, go. And girl, if you drop a single thing tonight, it won't be Sloane you answer to. It'll be me. The weight of the platter nearly buckled her knees, but there was no choice. There never was for a girl like her. So Wren climbed the stairs, out of the dark, and into the one place in all the keep she had been forbidden to go. The great hall hit her like a wall of noise and heat, torchlight, laughter, the clatter of cups, and the stamp of boots on stone. 100 bodies pressed together, warm and loud and golden, and the smell of them rolled over her thick enough to choke on. Roasted meat, spilled ale, sweat and perfume, and the heavy animal musk of a pack at full celebration. She kept her head down. She kept walking. The platter trembled in her grip. Her wounded shoulder screamed with every step, and the fever climbed and climbed, a slow silver tide rising behind her ribs until her vision swam at the edges and the floor seemed to breathe beneath her feet. Just reach the lower tables, set it down, disappear. That was all. That was the whole of her world in that moment. 3 simple things. And then she could vanish back into the dark, where no one would ever have to look at her. She wove between the celebrating wolves, a small gray shadow no one looked at twice, and for a few blessed seconds, it seemed she might make it. And then, at the high table, the king went still. Thorn had been staring at the servants' stairs for the better part of an hour, waiting, wound tight as a drawn bow, telling himself over and over that a king did not abandon a feast to chase a scent through the dark like a beast slipped off its leash. And then the scent moved. It rose up out of the floor and spilled into the room, no longer faint, no longer buried beneath ash and ale. It rolled toward him fresh and sharp, and laced now with something new. The warm copper bite of blood. Her blood. His head snapped up. The cup in his hand cracked along its rim. He did not notice. His midnight eyes cut across the crowded hall, past the dancers, past the drunk, hunting, and then they landed on a girl. A thin, ragged servant girl, half buried beneath a platter twice her size, dark hair falling loose across a face gone pale with fever. She was nothing. By every measure this gleaming room understood, she was nothing at all. A runt in a torn dress, blood drying on one shoulder, eyes fixed on the floor as though the floor were the only safe thing in the world. And the beast inside Thorn rose up and roared a single word so loud it nearly drove him to his knees. Mate. The whole world narrowed to her. The noise of the hall fell away. The light dimmed at its edges. There was only that small gray figure and the impossible certainty crashing through him like a flood breaking a dam. Her, after all the empty weeks, all the cold nights, all the faces that had meant less than nothing. It was a half-starved servant girl, bleeding in the corner of a forgotten northern keep. And his soul knew her the way it knew how to breathe. He had risen halfway from his chair before he understood he was moving at all. At the center of the hall, Wren felt it. The weight of eyes. Not the careless, contemptuous glances she was used to. Something else. Something heavy and total. Like standing too close to a fire. Like the thick stillness of the air just before a storm breaks. She lifted her head before she could stop herself, and across the crowded golden hall, she met the eyes of the king. The platter nearly slipped from her hands. Time did something strange. It thickened. It slowed. For one suspended breath, the whole roaring room went silent in her ears, and there was only him, dark, still, watching her as though no one else in the world existed. No one had ever looked at her like that. In all her years, no one had ever looked at her at all. Not really. The pack looked through her, or past her, or down at her. They saw a stain on the floor, a chore to be done, a thing to step over on the way to somewhere better. But this man, this terrifying, impossible man, he was looking at her as if she were the only real thing in the room, as if she mattered. The fever surged in her chest. The silver light flared bright beneath her sleeves, hot and sudden, and her heart slammed so hard against her ribs that she thought it might break free. Something deep inside her, something that had slept her whole life, turned slowly over and reached toward him. And it frightened her to the marrow, because she knew, with the cruel certainty of the unloved, exactly what this was. A mistake. A trick of the torchlight. A king did not look at a runt with anything but disgust. In another breath, he would catch the death on her, the ash, the wrongness she carried in her very blood, and his face would twist like all the others before him. So she did the only thing she had ever known how to do. She looked away. She ducked her head, gripped the platter, and turned to flee back into the shadows where she belonged. Her whole body was shaking now. Her pulse roared in her ears. Run, every instinct screamed. Run, before he sees what you are. Thorn watched her turn away from him, and something in his chest cracked clean open. She had looked at him. For one perfect, shattering moment, she had truly looked at him. And then she had flinched, lowered her eyes, turned to run the way prey runs, the way something hurt over and over again, learns to run before it can be hurt one more time. That single motion told him more than 100 reports ever could. This was how she lived. Head down, eyes lowered, bracing always, always, for the next blow. His mate, the other half of his own soul, the one creature in all the realm fated to stand beside him as queen. And they had made her into this, a frightened thing in rags, bleeding, expecting nothing from the world but cruelty. A low growl built in his chest before he could stop it. Not at her. Never at her. At all of them. At this whole gilded, rotten hall. At the golden daughter who had fawned at his elbow all evening in her wine-colored velvet. At the sweating alpha. At every single wolf who had ever looked at that girl and seen something less than precious. Bram caught the sound and went rigid at his shoulder. My king? Thorn could not answer. He was already on his feet. Every instinct he owned howled at him to cross the hall, to take her by the hand, to put his own body between her and every soul that had ever made her flinch, to carry her out of this place and never let her lower her eyes again as long as she lived. But he forced himself still, because he had seen her flinch, because whoever she was, whatever they had done to her here, the very last thing this trembling girl needed was a strange king the size of a bear bearing down on her in front of 100 drunken wolves. She would bolt. Or worse, she would freeze, the way the badly broken ones freeze, and he would have made himself just one more terror in a life already overflowing with them. Slow, he told the beast, raging beneath his skin. Slow. We do this right. She is not a prize to be seized. She is not a thing to be claimed and carried off into the night. She is a person, and she has been treated like a thing her entire life, by every soul in this room. The beast did not like it. Not at all. The beast wanted her now, wanted to close the distance and breathe her in and shield her with his own body until the shaking stopped. But Thorn held the leash, and for the first time in his life, he found himself grateful for every hard lesson in patience the world had ever beaten into him. He would not be one more thing that frightened her. He would earn the right to stand near her instead, to speak to her gently, to watch the fear go out of her eyes one careful day at a time, however long it took, however many years. So he stayed where he was, fists clenched white at his sides, and watched the small gray figure slip back toward the shadows. And he made himself a quiet vow there in the roaring hall, fiercer than any oath he had ever sworn over conquered ground. He would find a way to that girl, gently, patiently, on her terms, not his, and he would spend whatever was left of his life teaching her that she never had to look down again. He turned to Bram, the words half formed on his lips. Send someone after her, quietly. Learn her name. See her safe. Begin the slow, careful work of reaching a soul that had been taught to expect nothing. He never got the chance to say a single word of it, because the great oak doors of the hall exploded inward. The sound was deafening. Wood shattered into jagged splinters that sprayed across the stone floor. The winter wind howled in through the broken doorway, and it carried a stench that turned every stomach in the room. Rotting meat and wet fur, and something sick and wrong beneath it all. And then they poured in. Rogues. 12 of them, maybe more. Massive, twisted shapes, their bodies warped by hunger and dark, half-mad magic, their eyes glowing a sick yellow in the torchlight. These were not wolves. Not anymore. They were the broken remnants of what wolves had once been, starved and cursed into monsters, and they came through the doorway like a flood of teeth and claws. The hall erupted into chaos. Tables flipped, cups and platters crashed to the floor. The screams of unarmed servants tore through the air as the celebrating pack scrambled, too drunk and far too slow, clawing for the beasts inside them, and the rogues were ready for them. Crossbows, strapped crude and brutal to their forearms, firing bolts that gleamed a poisonous silver in the firelight. The first volley sang across the hall, and 2 of the Alpha's warriors went down mid-shift, the silver tearing through them before they could finish turning. "Protect the king!" Bram's voice cut through the panic like a blade. He had his sword out already, the steel flashing, and the royal guard surged in to form a wall of bodies around the high table. But Thorn was no longer behind it. He had already moved. He vaulted the oak table in a single fluid motion, and even as he came down, his body was changing, blurring, the man giving way to something vast and dark, fur the color of deepest midnight, muscle layered upon muscle, claws like daggers, and a roar that shook the iron chandeliers on their chains. He landed in the very heart of the invaders as a monstrous black lichen, and he began to tear them apart. The hall became a slaughter, and in the middle of it, small, fevered, forgotten, stood Wren. The platter had fallen from her hands at the first crash. She stood frozen, her back pressed hard against a cold stone pillar, watching the only world she had ever known dissolve into blood and screaming. A bolt hissed past her cheek and buried itself in the wood beside her head. She did not move. She could not. The fever had her fully in its grip now. The silver light blazing bright beneath her skin, bright enough to glow straight through the wool of her sleeves, and her bones had begun to ache with a deep, grinding pressure that stole the breath from her lungs. Something was happening inside her. Something was waking. Across the chaos, even as he ripped through his enemies, Thorn felt her, that bright pulse of scent flaring higher and higher, and beneath it a thread of pure terror that drove his beast half wild. His huge dark head swung around, searching for her through the smoke and the blood. There, by the pillar, alone, defenseless, the silver light pouring off her now in waves, and bearing down on her, drawn by the very same blazing scent that had stopped a king in his tracks, came one of the rogues, the largest of them, scarred, half its face a ruin of old healed wounds. Its sick yellow eyes locked onto the small glowing figure by the pillar, and its jaws cracked open wide, ropes of foul saliva swinging from yellowed fangs. It saw what Thorn saw. It smelled what Thorn smelled. Power, ancient, and utterly, helplessly vulnerable, wrapped in the fragile shell of a girl who could not even shift to save her own life. And it lunged. Thorn roared and surged toward her, hurling rogues aside like rag dolls. But he was a heartbeat too far. He saw the great scarred beast leave the ground, saw Wren's pale face turn slowly toward it, saw her throw up her thin arms in a useless, instinctive gesture of defense, bracing for the tearing of teeth. No, the word tore through him, raw and desperate and entirely without words. No, he would not reach her in time. He knew it with sickening certainty, even as his claws gouged deep furrows in the stone and his great body strained across the ruined hall. His mate, found at long last, after a lifetime of searching, about to be torn apart in front of his very eyes. And Wren shut her eyes and waited for the end she had always, somehow known was coming for her. The fever roared in her ears like a tide breaking on rock. The silver light beneath her skin flared so bright it bled through her closed eyelids, turning the whole dark world behind them a blinding, burning white. And deep in her chest, behind the pain, behind the terror, behind 18 long years of being told she was nothing, nothing, nothing. Something ancient opened one enormous eye, and the cage began to crack. The cage did not crack quietly. It shattered. The pressure that had lived in Wren's chest her whole life, the slow burning weight she had carried through every cold night and every cruel day, finally broke its bounds all at once. A sound erupted from her small frame, like thunder rolling under water, deep, vast, far too large for a body so thin. And the scarred rogue, already in the air, already reaching for her with open jaws, was thrown backward as if a great invisible hand had seized it by the spine. It struck a stone pillar across the hall hard enough to crack the column from base to ceiling. Dust rained down through the torchlight. The beast crumpled to the floor in a heap and did not rise again. For half a heartbeat, nothing in the world moved. And then the scent hit. It rolled out from Wren in a single suffocating wave. Ash and ozone, and something far older than either, something that did not belong to this age of the world at all. It overrode the blood and the silver and the rot, drowning every other smell in the hall beneath its terrible, ancient weight. Every wolf in the room froze where they stood. The rogues, the pack, even Thorn, caught mid-stride, his huge dark lichen body locking up as the scent crashed over him, and his oldest instinct screamed a single word into his skull. Bow. Down by the pillar, Wren fell to her knees, and she began to scream. It was not a scream of fear. It was the sound of something breaking free after 18 years buried alive. The sound of a thing too long denied finally, violently, claiming the air. The silver light that had only ever flickered beneath her skin now poured out of her, from her eyes, from her open mouth, brilliant, blinding. A violet-white radiance that lit the ruined hall brighter than any torch ever could. Her bones cracked and lengthened. Her spine arched. The thin gray dress tore away as her body grew, expanding, reshaping into something the continent had not seen in 1,000 years. Fur erupted across her, not gray, not brown, silver white, shimmering like liquid moonlight poured over living muscle. She grew larger, and larger still, larger than the rogues, larger than the alpha, larger than the warriors cowering against the walls. She rose and rose until she matched even the monstrous black bulk of the king himself. And when the blinding light at last began to fade, a colossal silver lichen stood in the center of the broken hall. Crown like ridges of pale bone swept back along her brow. Her eyes burned a deep, luminous violet, and the power radiating off her was so vast, so ancient, so utterly beyond anything the wolves of this keep had ever known, that it pressed down on the very air like the weight of the deep sea. She let out a low growl, and every living thing in that hall went to the floor. The rogues, the pack, the alpha himself, chin pressed flat to the cold stone, trembling like a beaten pup, forced down, all of them, into the deepest and most terrified submission of their lives. Wren's glowing violet gaze swept slowly across the room, over the cowering wolves, over the dead and the dying. And finally, it came to rest on the king. Thorn stood in the wreckage of the hall, still in his great black lichen form, and he did not bare his teeth. He did not snarl. He did not challenge. The most feared conqueror in the history of the realm looked up at the silver creature towering before him, and something deep inside his own ancient blood sang in recognition. He knew her now, not just as his mate, as something more. Something the deepest, oldest part of him had no choice at all but to revere. The first blood. The lineage that had come before all the others, the sacred origin of his entire kind, thought lost to the world, vanished in the long dark wars of an age no living wolf remembered. And she was standing in front of him, wrapped in silver light, looking at him with eyes that held both a frightened servant girl and a goddess older than the mountains themselves. Slowly, deliberately, the king lowered his massive head, he bent his front legs, and he knelt. The most powerful wolf alive, brought to his knees, not by force, not by defeat, but by a recognition so profound that it left no room inside him for anything else. Down in some still distant corner of her own mind, Wren felt the world shift beneath her. The pain was gone. For the first time in her entire life, there was no fever, no grinding in her bones, no suffocating pressure behind her ribs. The thing that had tormented her since childhood, the thing she had believed was a sickness, a curse, a slow and certain death, had never been any of those things. It had been her, all along. Caged, suppressed, waiting in the dark for the day the chains would finally give. And now, it was free. She stood in her own power and breathed it in, this strange new ocean of strength that thrummed through every part of her, and she did not understand it yet. But she felt it. She felt vast. She felt, for the first time in 18 years, completely whole. And then her violet gaze fell on the black lichen kneeling before her, and something deep in her chest pulled tight. That pull, the same one she had felt down in the cellar, the same warmth that had reached through the cold stone to find her in the dark, the same impossible sense of being noticed, of being known, that had so terrified her in the crowded hall. It was him, the king. He was the one who had been calling to her this whole time, across the mountain, through the floor, into the deepest, loneliest part of her. And now he knelt at her feet, his great head bowed, every line of his monstrous body open and undefended before her, offering her something no king had ever offered another living soul: surrender. The bond slammed into place between them like a steel trap snapping shut. It was not gentle. It was not slow. After a lifetime of being kept apart, it crashed through both of them at once, 1,000 threads of soul weaving violently into one. And Wren gasped inside her great silver form as it filled her to overflowing. She could feel him, his mind brushing against hers, his awe, his fierce, trembling protectiveness. And beneath all of it, raw and exposed, the desperate relief of a man who had been drowning in his own darkness for so terribly long, and had finally found the shore. She felt his madness, the long, cold hunger that had nearly broken his mind. And she felt at ease, just from being near her, just from her looking at him. He needed her, not the way the pack had needed her, to scrub their floors and haul their water and absorb their endless cruelty. He needed her the way a man lost at sea needs the lighthouse, the way the long night needs the rising moon, and something deep in Wren's wounded, careful heart cracked quietly open at the feeling of it. Mate, his mind whispered into hers, rough and reverent all at once. Mine. Found. Finally found. She should have been afraid. A day ago, she would have been. A day ago, she had flinched from a single look across a crowded hall, certain that any attention at all could only ever end in pain. But the bond did not let her hide. It laid him bare to her, all of him, the ruthless king and the lonely man both. And she could feel with absolute certainty that there was no cruelty in him meant for her. None. Only this aching, overwhelming devotion that made her chest hurt simply to receive it. Slowly, the great silver lichen lowered her own head, and she let out a soft, answering sound, a low, vibrating purr that rolled through the very foundation of the keep, warm where her growl had been terrible. Permission. Rise, it said, without any need for words. The king rose, and as he came up, his monstrous black form began to blur and fold in on itself, shrinking, reshaping, the lichen giving way to the man. In a single heartbeat, Thorn stood on two legs in the center of the ruined hall, bare and entirely unbothered by it, his scarred chest heaving, his midnight eyes never once leaving the silver creature before him. Bram, recovering from the paralyzing weight of the First Blood's aura, moved fast. He swept a heavy cloak from a fallen chair and tossed it through the air. Thorn caught it without looking, draped it across his broad shoulders, and took a single slow step toward her. Then another. The silver lichen watched him come. She did not retreat, and Wren, deep inside that magnificent form, felt the strangest thing of all. She felt safe. For the first time in her life, with the most dangerous man in the world walking straight toward her. She felt safe. The transformation back was nothing at all like the stories had promised. The old archives had spoken of agony, of bones breaking and re-knitting wrong, of a pain so great that young wolves wept and screamed through their very first shift back to skin. For Wren, it was like water turning quietly to ice, smooth, cool, effortless. The violet light swallowed her towering silver frame, drew close around her, and then gently receded. And when it cleared, she stood in the center of the hall on 2 feet once more. But she was not the same girl who had carried that platter through the door. The magic that had caged her wolf had caged her body too, stunted it, starved it of all it should have been. Now, free at last, the change rippled through her human form as well, unmaking 18 years of suppression in the space of a breath. Her dull, ashen hair had become a cascade of shimmering silver, falling down her back like spun moonlight. The ragged trenches Sloane's claws had torn into her shoulder were simply gone, the skin smooth and whole and unmarked, as if the cruelty had never happened at all. She stood taller, straighter, lighter somehow, as though a great stone had been lifted from her spine, and her eyes, once a frightened, downcast brown, now held a permanent ring of luminous violet around each iris. Even draped in the torn and blood-stained rags of a servant, she was radiant, terrible, and beautiful at once. A queen wearing the cast-off clothing of a slave. Thorn stopped a hair's breadth in front of her. For a long moment he simply looked at her, drinking in the sight, as if he could not quite let himself believe she was real, and standing, and safe. Then, slowly, he lifted his hands. Large, scarred, calloused from a lifetime of war and conquest. And with a gentleness that did not match the rest of him at all, he cupped her face. The moment his skin touched hers, the bond between them flared white-hot. A shock wave of warmth rolled out through the cold, ruined hall, and in its wake, the very scent of the room changed. The ash and ozone, the blood and silver and rot, all of it gave way to something soft and clean and new. Night blooming jasmine, rain falling on warm stone. The smell of two souls finally, completely joined. Wren's breath caught in her throat. His hands were so careful, so impossibly careful, as if she were something precious, something that might break apart at the wrong pressure. No one had ever touched her like that, not once in all her years. Every hand that had ever come near her had come to strike, or to grab, or to shove her back down into the dark where they wanted her. But these hands cradled her face like an answered prayer. She looked up into his eyes, the most feared man on the entire continent, and she did not flinch. She did not cower. For the first time in her life, she did not look away. Mine, Thorn breathed. His voice was a low, raw command, but it trembled at the very edges, undone completely by the simple feeling of her skin beneath his palms. My mate, my queen, and Wren, the runt, the wolfless, the useless one, the girl who had been told 1,000 times in 1,000 cruel ways that she was nothing, heard those words and felt them land somewhere deep and broken inside her. Somewhere that had never once in 18 years been spoken to with tenderness. She did not melt into him. She was not that girl, not yet. 18 years of cruelty did not simply vanish at a single touch, however gentle, but she held his gaze, and she let herself believe, just for that one suspended moment, that it might actually be true. And you, she said softly, are mine. Her voice came out changed, layered, the frightened girl and the ancient creature speaking together as one, a strange dual-toned music that echoed through the broken hall and made the surviving wolves shiver where they lay pressed against the floor. Thorn's eyes closed, just for a breath, as if her words were something he had waited his entire life to hear and could barely stand to finally receive. His thumbs brushed slow along her cheekbones, and the bond between them pulled tighter, warmer, deeper, until Wren could no longer tell where her own heartbeat ended and his began. She could feel the steady thunder of it through the bond, matched now to hers. Two rhythms become one. It would have been so easy in that moment to fall into him completely. The bond urged it, sang for it. Two halves rushing to become whole again after a lifetime torn apart. The pull of it almost too much for either of them to resist. But Thorn held himself perfectly still. Even now, even with his mate radiant and willing beneath his hands, and his every instinct roaring at him to pull her close and never let go. Because he could feel her too, through the bond. He could feel the careful, wounded thing in her that was still learning, breath by breath, that a touch did not always have to mean pain. He could feel how new all of this was to her, how fragile, how much raw courage it had taken her just to hold his gaze instead of dropping her eyes to the floor. And he would not rush her, not for anything in this world. She had been taken from, used, stepped over, and shoved aside. Her whole life long, he would not be one more person who took. When she came to him fully, and she would, he knew it down in his bones. It would be because she had chosen to, freely, on her own terms, in her own time, because she wanted to, not because the bond compelled her, and not because a king had commanded it. She deserved that. After everything that had been done to her, she deserved at the very least that. So he gentled his hold. He let the fierce wave of need settle into something quieter, something patient and sure, and he pressed his forehead, very softly, against hers. "Whenever you are ready," he murmured, so low it was almost only for her. "However long that takes. There is no part of you I am not willing to wait for." Wren's eyes burned, not from fever, not from pain, from something she had no name for, because no one had ever once given her reason to feel it before. She had spent her whole life being told exactly what she was: useless, broken, less than the dirt on the floor. And in the span of a single night, the world had turned itself entirely inside out, and here was this man, this king, this storm of a creature wearing a borrowed cloak, telling her that she was worth waiting for, that she was worth being gentle with, that she got to choose. She lifted one trembling hand, slowly, carefully, and she laid it over the back of his, where it still cradled her cheek. She did not pull it away. She held it there, in that small, quiet choice, the first truly free choice of her entire life, said more than any words ever could. Thorn felt it through the bond, and something in his chest broke open with the sweetness of it. And then, from beneath an overturned table across the hall, a small broken sob shattered the moment. Sloane, huddled in the wreckage, her wine-colored velvet soaked through with spilled ale and her own terrified tears, the golden daughter of Red Creek stared at the silver-haired queen with wild, disbelieving eyes. "No," she whispered. "No, it cannot be. She is a slave. She is nothing. She is a useless runt. She cannot be." Thorn did not so much as turn his head, but the air in the hall went cold, and Wren, her hand still resting over the king's, slowly lifted her violet gaze from his face and turned it, for the very first time, toward the girl who had tormented her for 18 long years. The power stirred again in her chest, vast, patient, waiting to see what she would choose to do with it. And for one long, suspended breath, Wren said nothing at all. Wren took a step toward Sloane. The stone cracked beneath her bare foot. She had not meant to do it. The power moved with her now, eager, hungry, answering the cold thing that had risen in her chest the moment her eyes found the golden girl cowering in the wreckage. Frost crept out across the floor where she walked. It laced through the spilled wine. It silvered the pooled blood. The very air seemed to drop, breath fogging now in the great hall that had been so warm with celebration only minutes before. Sloane scrambled backward on her hands. "Stay away from me," she gasped. "Stay back, you thing." And there it was. That word, that tone, the same one that had followed Wren down every cold corridor of this keep for 18 years. Thing, runt. Nothing. Something inside Wren turned to ice to match the floor. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself imagine it. How easy it would be. One swipe of a clawed hand. One breath of that terrible ancient power. After everything Sloane had done, after every blow and every sneer and every wound, no one in this hall would lift a finger to stop her. She could end it. Right now. She could make Sloane feel even a fraction of what she had felt, kneeling in the cold, bleeding in the dark, believing she was worthless because the people who were supposed to protect her had told her so every single day of her life. The power surged toward it, wanting, waiting, and Wren lifted her hand. Across the hall, Thorn did not move to stop her. He could have. He was fast enough. But he stood where he was, watching his mate with those steady midnight eyes, and through the bond she felt something pass from him to her. Not a command, not a warning, just trust. He would not choose this for her. He would not take this moment from her the way everything else in her life had been taken. Whatever she did now, she would do as herself. Freely. And somehow, that was harder than any order could have been. Because in the silence, with her hand raised and the power screaming for release, Wren heard a small voice that did not belong to the ancient creature inside her. It belonged to the girl, the one who had scrubbed the floors, the one who had learned to be a shadow, the one who had survived 18 years of cruelty, not by becoming cruel, but by holding on, somewhere deep and stubborn, to the belief that she was better than the people who hurt her. If she struck Sloane down now, helpless and weeping in the wreckage, what would be the difference between them? Sloane had power once, and she had used it to wound, to dominate, to make a smaller, weaker creature feel like nothing. That was the whole of what Sloane was. And it was the one thing in all the world Wren had sworn, in the deepest part of her heart, never to become. Her raised hand trembled. The frost stopped spreading. Slowly, so slowly. Wren lowered her arm. "No," she said quietly. The dual-toned voice had softened. The ancient creature still hummed beneath it, vast and patient. But it was the girl who spoke now. The girl who had finally found her voice and chose, with it, not to scream. "You spent your whole life trying to make me small," Wren said. "And the worst thing I could do, the very worst, would be to let you turn me into you." Sloane stared up at her, mouth open, uncomprehending. "I am not going to kill you," Wren went on. Her voice did not waver. "Not because you do not deserve to be afraid, but because I am not yours to shape anymore. You do not get to decide what I become. Not ever again." She turned away from the golden girl, and in turning away, she felt something she had never felt in all her years of suffering. Not power, not vengeance. Freedom. The warmth of Thorn's pride rolled through the bond, fierce and bright. But he said nothing. He only watched her, and in his eyes was a look she would carry with her for the rest of her life. He looked at her as if she were the strongest thing he had ever seen. But the night was not finished with them yet, because the rogues were not all dead. Across the hall, where the shadows gathered thick beyond the fallen tables, a handful of the twisted creatures still clung to life, driven half mad by the terror of the First Blood's aura. Their assassination failed, their numbers shattered. Cornered and cornered things do not surrender. They run, or they make one last desperate gamble. The largest survivor, a lean rogue with a crossbow still strapped to its trembling forearm, lifted itself from the wreckage, its sick yellow eyes fixed on the silver-haired queen who stood with her back turned, vulnerable, distracted. It raised the bow. The silver-tipped bolt caught the torchlight, gleaming with the poison that could fell even a lichen. It aimed straight for the back of Wren's neck. Wren felt it before she heard it. The power inside her flared in warning, a cold spike up her spine, and she began to turn. But she was still new to this, still learning what her own body could do, still half a girl who flinched instead of fought. She would not have been fast enough, but she did not have to be. Thorn moved. He did not shift. He did not have the time, and he did not need it. He simply crossed the distance in a single blur of motion, faster than the eye could follow, faster than anything a body that size should move. The bolt loosed, and Thorn's hand closed around it in midair, a hand's breadth from Wren's throat. The silver hissed against his palm, searing, smoking. He did not so much as flinch. He turned, and with the bolt still clenched in one bleeding fist, he looked at the rogue who had dared aim at his queen. There was nothing human left in his eyes. He was across the hall before the creature could draw breath. His free hand seized the rogue by the throat, lifted it clean off the ground, and with a single brutal motion that needed no claws and no fangs, it was over. The body dropped, lifeless. And in the terrible silence that followed, Thorn turned back to Wren, his burned hand still smoking, and through the bond she felt the full force of what had moved him. Not rage, not bloodlust, fear. The bone-deep, soul-shaking fear of a man who had searched his whole life for one person and had very nearly lost her in the span of a single heartbeat. "You are bleeding," Wren breathed. She crossed to him without thinking, reaching for the seared hand, and he let her take it. The silver had burned an ugly line across his palm, but already, where her fingers touched, the wound had begun to cool, to close. The first blood in her, ancient and healing, knitting his flesh back together. He watched her do it with an expression she could not name. "It is nothing," he said roughly. "It is not nothing." Wren looked up at him, and her violet eyes were fierce now. "You put your hand in front of silver. For me. I would put my hand in front of anything. For you." He said it simply, like a fact of the world, like the sun rising. "That is what this is, Wren. That is what you are to me. Do you understand?" She did not. Not fully. Not yet. But she was beginning to. And that, after a lifetime of being told she was worth nothing, felt like the most dangerous and wonderful thing of all. Bram approached then, careful, his sword sheathed, his head dipping low in deference to them both. "My king, my queen." The words still sat strange on his tongue, but there was no mockery in it, only awe. "The hall is secure. The last of the rogues are dead. But the keep," he hesitated. "The keep is in shock. The pack does not know what to do. Their alpha is on the floor. And the things that have been revealed tonight." He trailed off, glancing toward the far end of the hall, where Royce, the alpha of Red Creek, still lay pressed to the stone, unable to rise under the weight of Wren's lingering aura, sweating, pale, his arrogance entirely gone. The man who had stripped her name, who had kept her as a thrall, who had let his daughter carve scars into a child and called it mercy that he had not simply cast her out to freeze. Wren looked at him for a long moment, and the cold thing in her chest stirred again. But this time she knew it. This time she held it. "He has answers," she said, "doesn't he? About what I am, about where I came from." Thorn followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened. "He knew," the king said quietly. "Look at him. Look at how he will not meet your eyes. He knew what you were, all this time, and he buried it." The certainty of it settled over Wren like a stone, because it explained everything. The fever no one would treat, the scent no one could place, the way Royce had kept her close instead of casting her out, kept her where he could watch her, control her, make sure the thing inside her stayed asleep. It had never been mercy. It had been fear and greed, and something darker still that she could not yet name. She turned to Thorn, and through the bond he felt the question forming in her before she spoke it. "I want the truth," she said. "All of it. Before anything else happens. I have spent my whole life not knowing what I am, why I was hated, why my mother left." Her voice caught just slightly on that last word. "I will not become a queen of anything until I know whose daughter I am." Thorn looked at her with profound respect. "Then you will have it," he said, "every word. And if he lies—" His eyes flicked to Royce, and the threat in them needed no finishing. Wren breathed in slow. The power within her had quieted now, settling into something steady and deep, like a great tide drawn back to wait. She could feel it there, patient, enormous, ready when she called. But she was learning, already, that the having of power and the using of it were two very different things. The girl who had carried a platter through that door a lifetime ago would have given anything for one moment of strength. The queen she was becoming understood that strength was not the hard part. The hard part was choosing what to do with it, over and over, every single time. She looked around the ruined hall, at the cowering pack who had tormented her, yes, but who had also been ruled by fear their whole lives, beaten into cruelty by a man who fed on it. At Sloane, broken in the wreckage, at the dead, at the smoking ruin of a celebration meant to honor a king, and at the king himself, standing close at her side, steady, patient, hers if she chose him, waiting, as he had promised, for her to be ready. So much had been taken from her, but for the first time in her life, what happened next would be hers to decide. "Bring him to the center of the hall," Wren said. Her voice rang clear and steady through the broken silence. "Make him kneel where everyone can see. The whole pack should hear what he has to answer for." She paused. "They have spent 18 years watching me be made small. They can spend tonight watching the truth come out." Bram bowed low and turned to carry out the order. And as the guards moved to drag the trembling Alpha to the heart of the hall, Wren stood tall in her blood-stained rags, silver hair falling like moonlight down her back, and she gathered herself for what was coming. She did not know yet all the truth she was about to uncover. She did not know the betrayal that waited in Royce's answers, the bargain, the curse, the mother who had not abandoned her at all. She only knew that she was done being afraid. The fever was gone. The cage was broken. The shadow she had spent her whole life pretending to be had finally stepped into the light. And whatever came next, she would face it standing up. Thorn's hand found the small of her back, steady, warm, not pulling her, not pushing her. Just there. Take whatever time you need, he murmured. I am not going anywhere. Wren lifted her chin and looked at the man who had ruined her childhood, now kneeling at her feet. I'm ready, she said. They dragged Royce to the center of the hall. The alpha of Red Creek, who had ruled this keep with fear for as long as anyone could remember, was forced to his knees on the cold stone, right there in the open. Before the girl, he had spent 18 years grinding into the dirt. He could not rise. The weight of Wren's aura pressed him down, chin trembling toward the floor. And all around him, the surviving pack stayed low, watching, silent, waiting to see what the world would become now that it had turned upside down. Wren stood over him. She did not gloat. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked down at the man who had taken everything from her, and when she finally spoke, the dual-toned music of her voice filled the entire hall, soft and vast at once. You knew, she said, what I was, from the very beginning. Royce's eyes darted, looking for an escape that did not exist. Your Majesty, he rasped, turning his face toward Thorn instead, toward the king, as if a man might still find mercy in that direction. I swear it. I swear on the old gods, I did not know. She had no wolf, no scent. A wandering stray died in childbirth and left the girl behind. How could I have known she was anything more than a runt? You lie. Wren's voice cracked through the hall like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The power behind the words forced Royce's head down hard, his forehead striking the stone with an audible crack. The whole pack flinched as one. My mother did not die in childbirth, Wren said. I remember her face. I remember her running through the snow. And as she spoke, the ancient thing inside her stirred, and with it came the memories. The ones the curse had buried. The ones her own mother's dying magic had locked away alongside her wolf, sealed so deep that even Wren herself had believed the lie for 18 long years. Now the seal was broken, and the truth rose up like water through cracked ice, cold and clear and impossible to stop. She was running, Wren said, her violet eyes going distant, seeing something no one else in the hall could see. Through the deep woods, bleeding, she had been running for a long, long time, from men who hunted our kind, hunters who wanted the bloodline ended forever. Her gaze sharpened, fixed itself on Royce like a blade. But they did not catch her. You did. The hall had gone utterly still. Even the torches seemed to hold their breath. She came to you for sanctuary, Wren went on. Her voice trembled now, not with weakness, with the weight of a grief that had been buried alive inside her since before she could speak. She was dying. She begged you, not for herself, for her child. She asked you to keep me safe, to hide me, to give me a chance to live. Royce said nothing, but his silence was an answer all its own, and you saw what she carried. Wren's hand drifted, almost without her noticing, to her own bare throat. A silver amulet, the heirloom of an ancient house, a house everyone in this world believed had been wiped from existence long ago. You knew, the moment you saw it, exactly what it was worth. The memories poured through her now, vivid, terrible, whole. So you took it. You tore the amulet from a dying woman's neck, and then you left her there, in the snow, to bleed out alone in the cold, while her infant daughter screamed beside her in the dark. A horrified murmur rippled through the watching pack. Some of them, the older ones, lowered their eyes, as if they had always half suspected, as if a part of them had always known their alpha was capable of exactly this. But a child of that bloodline was a danger to you, Wren continued, her voice gaining strength. If anyone ever learned what I truly was, they would come asking how a small northern alpha came to possess a relic of the old house. They would take it back. They might well take your head along with it. So you needed me hidden, not dead. Dead children raise too many questions. Hidden. Her eyes blazed brighter. So you went to the witches of the far reaches, and you bought a curse. Dark magic, the forbidden kind. You bound it to me when I was still an infant. A curse to suppress my wolf, to mask my scent, to make me reek of ash and cold death, so that no wolf alive would ever once guess what truly slept inside me. And then you let this whole pack call me an abomination, and you fed on every year of it, because my suffering was the lock on your secret. The silence in the hall was deafening now. She drew a slow, shaking breath. For 18 years, you let me believe I was broken, cursed, worthless, a mistake the world should never have made, and the entire time, you knew I was the last daughter of the first blood, the oldest and most sacred line our kind has ever known. She looked down at him. Tell me I am wrong, Royce. Tell me, in front of all of them. Tell me one single word of it is a lie. He could not. His mouth opened, closed. No lie would come, because the truth had grown too large now, too fully spoken. It hung in the air of the hall where every wolf could feel the terrible shape of it pressing down. Is this true? Thorn's voice was very, very quiet, and that was what made it terrible. The king had not moved through any of it. He had stood at Wren's side, still as carved stone, letting her speak, letting her uncover her own truth in her own voice, in her own time. It had cost him something to stay still. She could feel it through the bond, the leashed fury straining against his control. But he had given her this. He had let it be hers. Now, though, the air around him had begun to ripple with barely contained rage, and the iron chandeliers overhead trembled and groaned on their chains. You took a dying woman's child, Thorn said, the most sacred bloodline our kind has ever produced, and you sold her into slavery in her own skin. You let her be tortured under your roof, for an amulet, for coin. It was for the pack. Royce shrieked it suddenly, desperation cracking his voice wide open. He clawed at the stone, trying to drag himself backward across the floor. The winters were hard. The amulet bought grain, bought weapons, kept us all alive through the lean years. I did what I had to do. Any alpha in my place would have done the same. Any of them. You did it for yourself. Wren's voice cut him off. Cold. Clear. Final. You fed your own vanity while you told your people they were starving. You let your daughter maim and torment anyone she decided was beneath her. You built an entire kingdom of cruelty on the back of one frightened, motherless child. And you called it survival. You called it strength. She took a single step toward him. The frost crept out again across the stone, lacing through the spilled wine, silvering the cooling blood. You want to know the difference between us, Royce? Her voice dropped low. You had power, and you used it to make the weak suffer, to take what was not yours, to hide your crimes and hoard your comfort while others bled. She stopped, and something shifted in her face, the cold thing in her chest, the vengeful thing, the thing that wanted so badly to tear him apart and call it justice. She set it down, again, the way she had with Sloane, the way she was learning to, over and over. And I, she said softly, have more power than you ever dreamed could exist, and I am not going to use it the way you did. Not on you. Not on anyone. A flicker of something crossed Royce's ruined face. Hope, perhaps. The desperate animal hope of a cornered thing that has glimpsed a crack of light. It died quickly, because at that exact moment, the shadows at the broken doorway shifted, and the last of the rogues, the ones thought scattered, the ones who had truly orchestrated this entire bloody assault from the beginning, made their final play. Not an attack. A voice. How very touching. A figure stepped through the ruined doors, not twisted like the others, not starved into a slavering monster. This one walked upright, cloaked, controlled, with eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence rather than feral hunger. The mind behind the silver bolts, the one who had sent the rogues into the king's own hall. The lost daughter of the old house, the figure said, voice smooth as oil over water. Returned to the world at last. Do you have any idea, child, how many of us have spent generations making absolutely certain your bloodline stayed buried in the snow where it belonged? Wren turned slowly to face the newcomer, and through the bond, she felt Thorn go rigid with sudden recognition. You, the king breathed. I knew this assault was too coordinated, too well armed. These rogues did not stumble onto a royal feast by chance. Of course they did not. The cloaked figure smiled, thin and humorless. We have been watching the girl for years, waiting. Ever since the first rumors reached us that the first blood might have somehow survived the old purges. The amulet surfacing in distant markets. The whispers of a cursed runt in a forgotten northern keep who smelled of ash and lightning. A pause. We could not allow the line to wake. The old houses ruled this entire world once. We will not stand by and watch them rise a second time. It took a slow step closer, and its smile sharpened. And we could not let the king find her first. A frightened runt in the snow we could erase quietly, and no one would ever ask where she had gone. But a queen of the old blood with a crown standing behind her, that we could never undo. So we came tonight, before the bond could close, before the world could see what you are. Its eyes flicked to Thorn and then back. It seems we came a few breaths too late. Thorn stepped in front of Wren, his body a wall, every muscle coiled to spring. But Wren laid a hand on his arm. No, she said quietly, and she stepped out from behind him, out into the open, where everyone could see. And she faced the thing that had hunted her bloodline across the centuries. The thing that had murdered her mother in all but the final, freezing blow. The thing that had come here tonight to finish what the curse had begun 18 years ago. You spent generations trying to make certain I never woke up, she said. The power began to rise in her, but it was not cold now. It was not vengeful. It was vast and clean and ancient as the mountains. You should have made certain, she said, because I am awake now. And there is nothing left in this world that can put me back to sleep. The cloaked figure's confidence flickered, just slightly. Then it snarled a sharp order, and the remaining rogues surged forward from the shadows. A last desperate wave of teeth and silver and dark intent hurling themselves at the silver-haired girl in the blood-stained rags. And Wren let the power come. She did not lose herself this time. She did not scream or writhe or shatter on the stone. She had felt the change tear through her once already, wild and uncontrolled. But now she reached for it the way a swimmer reaches for water. Deliberate, sure, unafraid. The violet light bloomed around her, but it did not consume her this time. It answered her. Her body shifted, smooth as ice forming over a still pond, and the colossal silver lichen rose once more in the center of the ruined hall. But there was no agony in it now, no confusion, no frightened girl trapped inside a power she did not understand. This time, Wren was fully present behind those glowing violet eyes. The girl and the ancient creature, finally, perfectly, one and the same. She was not a frightened thing whose cage had broken by accident. She was the first blood, awake, aware, and in absolute command of every ounce of what she was. The rogues faltered at the sight of her. Too late. What followed was not the chaos of before. It was not a desperate, fevered scramble for survival. It was something far more terrible to behold. It was a reckoning. Wren moved through the attackers like moonlight pouring through darkness, vast, silent, unstoppable. And beside her, the great black Lichen King fought as her equal, the two of them moving together in a harmony that needed no words at all. Through the bond, they were one mind, one purpose, anticipating each other, covering each other. Two halves of a single devastating whole, finally fighting side by side as they were always meant to. The rogues who had come to end an ancient bloodline learned, in their last moments, exactly what that bloodline had always been. It did not take long, and when the final twisted creature fell still on the stone, only the cloaked figure remained, backing slowly toward the broken doors, its smooth confidence finally utterly gone. "This changes nothing," it hissed, voice rising thin with the first real edge of fear. "There are more of us, far more than you know. The old houses will not be permitted to rise. You may have survived this night, girl, but you have only just begun to learn how many enemies a crown like yours will earn you." It turned to flee into the dark. It did not get far. Thorn was there, blocking the doorway. He had crossed the entire hall in the time it took the creature to speak its threat. He did not kill it. He seized it, pinned it, held it fast in one massive, unyielding grip. "This one lives," the king said, his voice a low rumble. "It knows things. Who sent it? How many more of them there are? Where they hide in the dark." His midnight eyes found Wren's across the wreckage of the hall. "Your enemies have names, my queen. And now we will learn every single one of them." Wren, still in her great silver form, lowered her head in slow agreement. Then the violet light gathered close around her once more, and she shifted back to skin as smoothly as water turning to ice. She stood in the center of the hall, silver-haired, steady, the blood-stained rags of a servant still clinging to a frame that now radiated nothing but a quiet, terrible majesty. And she walked on bare feet to where Royce still knelt, frozen, forgotten in the chaos of the true enemy's arrival. A small, broken man who had once thought himself a king of his own little world. He looked up at her with the eyes of someone who knew, at last and beyond all doubt, that there was no escape left for him anywhere. "You sold a child to hide a theft," Wren said. Her voice did not waver. It did not need to. "You murdered my mother by leaving her to die in the snow. You dealt in forbidden magic, which your own laws name as treason against every pack. And you spent 18 years building your comfort, your power, your daughter's golden life on my suffering." She did not raise her hand. She did not call the power. She simply spoke. And her voice was the voice of a queen. "By the truth spoken in this hall tonight, before the whole of your own pack as witness, House Red Creek is ended. Your name, your rank, your hold over these people, every last shred of it, gone." She turned to Thorn, and the king stepped forward, his face grim, the weight of judgment settling over the entire hall like a heavy shroud. "The penalty for treason against the crown," Thorn said quietly, "and for the murder of one of the old blood, is not mine to soften, even if I wished to." Royce began to plead, words tumbling, broken, desperate. But the time for pleading had passed long, long ago. It had passed the night he left a dying woman in the snow. Justice, when it finally came, was swift and clean and final. The tyrant of Red Creek, who had built his entire reign on the suffering of a single helpless child, met his end on the cold stone floor of his own hall. Before the eyes of every soul he had ruled through fear. And when it was done, the silence that fell over the hall was not the silence of horror. It was the silence of a long, suffocating weight, finally lifting from 100 bowed shoulders. The pack of Red Creek, who had cowered and obeyed and looked away for so many years, slowly began to lift their heads. They looked at their dead alpha. And then they looked at the silver-haired queen standing in the center of the ruined hall, draped in rags, glowing faintly with a light older than their entire world. The girl they had spent 18 years pretending not to see. She had become the single most powerful creature any of them had ever stood before. And she had chosen, at every turn this night, again and again, not to become the thing that had broken her. One by one, without being ordered to, the wolves of Red Creek lowered themselves to the floor. Not in terror this time, in reverence. Wren looked out over them, over the bowed heads, over the ruined hall, over the dead and the freed and the waiting, all tangled together in the torchlight. And she felt Thorn come to stand beside her once more, his burned hand finding hers, his presence steady and warm and sure. "It is done," he murmured. But Wren shook her head slowly, her violet eyes moving across the frightened, hopeful faces of the very pack that had tormented her since the day she was born. "No," she said softly. "It is only just beginning." Because the truth was out at last. The tyrant had fallen. The bloodline was awake and aware. But what to do now with the people who had hurt her? The ones who had followed Royce out of fear, who had hated her only because they had been carefully taught to, who now knelt trembling before her, waiting to learn whether their new queen would rule them with mercy or with vengeance. That choice, the hardest choice of all, it still lay ahead of her, and Wren intended to make it herself. The first thing Wren did was kneel, not to anyone, not in submission. She knelt in the wreckage of the hall beside the body of a young servant girl who had been cut down in the first chaos of the rogue attack. A girl Wren had known, had scrubbed floors beside, had shared scraps of stale bread with in the cold corners of the kitchen, on the long nights when neither of them could sleep for the hunger. She knelt, and she closed the girl's open, staring eyes with 2 gentle fingers. The hall watched in silence. A queen, on her knees in her blood-stained rags, grieving for a kitchen servant no one else had even noticed fall. She stayed there a moment longer than she needed to, long enough to say a silent farewell to a friend who had never once been cruel to her, in a place where kindness had been rarer than warmth. Long enough to make a quiet promise that this girl, at least, would be remembered, that her name would be spoken, that she would not simply vanish into the cold the way so many forgotten things had vanished from this keep. And in that single quiet act, the pack of Red Creek began to understand what kind of ruler had risen from the ashes of the one who had broken them. Wren rose slowly. She turned, and her violet eyes found the place where Sloane still huddled beneath the overturned table, soaked in spilled ale and her own tears, golden hair tangled across a face gone slack with terror. The whole hall tensed, because here, at last, was the reckoning everyone had been waiting for. The cruel daughter. The one who had carved scars into Wren's shoulder with her own claws. The one who had threatened to feed her to the hounds and laughed while she said it. If anyone in this keep had earned the queen's wrath. Wren walked toward her, slow, steady. The frost did not spread this time. The air did not drop. There was no terrible power gathering in her chest now. Only a calm, clear certainty that had taken her 18 years and 1 impossible night to find. She stopped in front of the cowering girl. "Look at me, Sloane." Sloane flinched, but she looked up. And for the first time in either of their lives, it was Sloane who looked small. Sloane who looked up from the floor. Sloane who braced, trembling, for a cruelty she had spent her whole life dealing out to others and never once imagined could turn and come for her. "You spent your life," Wren said quietly, "believing that the worth of a person could be weighed and measured, that some souls were born to rule, and others born only to be stepped on. You believed it so completely that you built your entire self around it, your beauty, your pride, every cruel thing you ever did." Sloane said nothing. Her lip trembled. "You were wrong," Wren said, "and now you're going to learn just how wrong, in the only way someone like you ever could." She straightened. "You are stripped of your name and your rank, the same as your father before you. You will not be harmed. You will not be cast out into the snow to freeze, though there were a great many nights you wished exactly that fate for me." A pause. "Instead, you will live. You will work. You will scrub the floors of this keep until your fingers ache. You will haul the freezing water from the lower wells. You will sleep in the cold corners you once sent me to. And you will wear—" Wren reached down, took the hem of her own torn, blood-stained servant's dress between 2 fingers. "Rags like these, the very rags you forced onto me, until you understand, all the way down in your bones, what it is to be the one looked through, instead of the one looking down." Sloane began to weep in earnest now. "Please, please, I did not know what you were. I swear I did not know." "That is exactly the point." Wren's voice was not cruel, But it was iron, and it did not bend. You did not know what I was, so you decided I was nothing. You did not need to know me at all in order to hurt me. You never once asked who I was, or where I came from, or what I might have been. You only saw something smaller and weaker than you, and you reached for it. That is the sickness you were raised in, Sloane. That is the whole of what your father gave you. She stepped back, and the only cure I have to offer you is to let you live the very life you gave to me. Maybe it will teach you something. Maybe it will teach you what kindness could have been if anyone had ever shown it to you. Or maybe it will teach you nothing at all, and you will spend your days bitter and hollow. Her voice softened just slightly, but you will be alive to choose which. And that is more than you ever once offered to anyone weaker than yourself. The guards came forward and drew Sloane, sobbing, toward the servants' quarters, and not one wolf in the hall spoke a single word in her defense, but not one cheered either, because there was nothing here to cheer for, only justice, measured and exact and strangely heavy. And somehow that was truer and harder to look away from than any cruelty could ever have been. Then Wren turned to face the rest of the pack. They were still on the floor, dozens of them, the wolves who had spat at her, beaten her, starved her, looked away while a child suffered under their own roof for 18 long years and told themselves it was none of their concern. They knelt now in the wreckage, heads bowed, and they waited. They waited to die. She could feel it coming off them in waves, the bone-deep certainty that this was the end, that the runt they had tormented for so long had become a goddess, and a goddess would surely demand blood for all of it. And they had seen what she did to the rogues. They had seen their own alpha fall on the cold stone. And every single law of the world they knew told them, with grim certainty, that they were next. Wren looked at them for a long, long moment, and something in her chest ached. Because she remembered every single one of these faces. She remembered which of them had thrown the stones in the courtyard when she was small, which had tipped over her water bucket and laughed as she scrambled to save what she could, which had passed her in the corridors with their lips curled, and which had simply turned away and told themselves it was safer not to see. The power in her stirred. It would have been so easy. A single word, a single breath, and it would have been just by the cold and brutal reckoning of the world she had been raised in. But Wren had spent 18 years living on the other side of that reckoning. She knew exactly what it felt like to be small and helpless and utterly certain that the powerful would never, ever show you mercy. She had lain awake on the cold stones of the stables and prayed for it anyway, knowing it would not come. And she knew, too, the thing that no one in this entire keep had ever once bothered to learn. That cruelty is not born, it is taught. That fear breeds it, the way damp breeds rot. That a pack ruled by a tyrant slowly becomes a tyrant in miniature, each wolf passing the cruelty downward to whoever happens to stand below them, because it is the only language they have ever been given, the only way they know to feel safe, to feel strong, to feel like anything other than the next victim in line. These wolves had not been born monsters. They had been made, slowly, year by year, by Royce, by the fear he ruled with, by a world that told them over and over that strength was the only thing that mattered, and the weak deserved whatever they got. She could break that. Here. Tonight. She could reach into a cycle older than the stones of this keep and snap it clean in two. Or she could feed it, one last time, and become, in the end, exactly what had been done to her. Wren lifted her hand. The whole pack flinched as one, bracing for the blow, and a wave of warm, soothing power rolled out from her instead. It washed over the kneeling wolves, gentle as the first spring rain after a long winter, and it lifted the crushing weight of her aura from their shoulders. The terrible pressure that had pinned them all to the floor simply released. "Rise," she said. No one moved. "Rise," she said again, softer this time. "All of you, get up off the floor. No one in this hall will ever again kneel in fear. Not while there is breath in me. Not while I rule here." Slowly, disbelieving, the wolves of Red Creek began to climb to their feet. They stared at her, waiting for the trap to close, for the cruelty that surely had to be coming, because cruelty was the only thing any of them had ever understood. It was the shape of their whole world. It did not come. "I know what you did," Wren said, and her voice carried clear to every corner of the ruined hall. "I remember all of it. I will not stand here and pretend that I do not, and I will not insult the truth by saying it did not matter. It mattered. Some of you threw the stones. Some of you spat. Most of you simply looked away and told yourselves that it was safer not to see a child suffer." Heads dropped, and this time it was shame in them, where before there had only been fear. "But I also know why," she went on, and her voice gentled. "You were ruled by a man who fed on cruelty, who taught you from the time you were pups that weakness was a sin, that the only way to ever be safe was to make certain there was always someone weaker than you, kneeling somewhere below. He built that in you, carefully, deliberately, and then he aimed all of it at a child, because a child could not fight back, and because watching me suffer kept the rest of you too afraid to ever question him." She let that settle over them like falling snow. "That ends tonight." She began to walk slowly among them now, and they parted to let her pass, watching her with wide and wary eyes, as if she were some creature out of an old story that had stepped into their hall and might vanish if they looked away. "Red Creek, as you have always known it, is finished," Wren said. "The pack that hunted the weak, the pack that worshipped strength and called it virtue, the keep that stood for generations as a monument to one man's cruelty and called it order. All of it is gone now, and I will not mourn it, and neither should any of you." She stopped in the center of the hall, where the torchlight fell brightest across the broken stone, but the people are not the pack. You are not Royce. You are only what he made you. And that means you can also be unmade, and then made again, into something better than you ever knew you could be. She turned in a slow circle, meeting their eyes, one face at a time. "This keep will not be a fortress of fear any longer. From this night forward, it will be a sanctuary, a place for the cast-off, the wolfless, the runts, the ones every other pack threw out into the snow because they were too small or too strange or too broken to be of any use." Her voice gathered force, low and certain. "Every soul that this cruel world looked at and decided was worthless will have a home here, under my protection, under my roof, because I was that soul, and someone, somewhere, should have protected me, and no one ever did. A murmur moved through the gathered wolves, but it was not fear now. It was something else entirely. Something that had not lived in these cold stone walls for a very long time. Hope. You followed a tyrant because you were afraid, Wren said. I will never give you a single reason to be afraid of me. But understand this, all of you, and understand it clearly. Her violet eyes flashed, and for just a moment the ancient power gleamed behind them like lightning behind a cloud. The cruelty ends here. If any one of you ever again raises a hand against someone smaller, someone weaker, someone who cannot fight back, simply because you can, then you will answer to me, not Royce's way, my way, which is to make you understand completely and from the inside what it is to be the one who suffers it. She let the warning land. Let them feel the weight of it. Then she softened, and the queen became, for a moment, the girl again. But if you are willing to try and become something better than what you were, then there is a place for you here. All of you, even the ones who threw the stones. She drew a slow breath. Especially the ones who threw the stones. Because if I can stand here, in the very hall where I was a slave, and forgive even that, then surely you can learn to become people worth forgiving. The silence stretched long and taut, and then, from somewhere deep in the crowd, an old wolf stepped forward, gray-muzzled and bent with years, one of the oldest in the pack, one who had been there, Wren knew, the night her father died in the borderlands, the night her name was stripped away from her and she became nothing. He lowered himself to one knee, but this time it was different. This time there was no terror in the gesture at all. He bowed his old gray head, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked with something that might have been grief, and might have been shame, and might have been the very first true respect he had felt in more years than he could count. "My queen," he said, and every soul in that hall could hear that he meant it. One by one, the others followed, not pressed down by her aura, not driven by any fear of death. They knelt because they chose to, lowering themselves before the girl they had so deeply wronged, offering her the only thing they had left in all the world to give, their loyalty, their shame, their willingness, at long last, to try and be something better than they had been. Wren watched them, and her throat tightened, and her eyes began to burn. Because this was the thing she had never once dared to dream of in all her long years of suffering. Not power. She had never, not for a single moment, wanted power. She had wanted to matter, to be seen, to be treated as though her life had weight and shape and worth. And here, in the ruins of the very hall where she had been a slave, the entire world that had once looked straight through her was finally looking at her. And it was not looking with fear. It was looking with hope. Thorn came to her side then. Through all of it, he had stood back. He had let her speak, let her rule. Let this be hers, entirely and completely, in a way that nothing in her whole life until now had ever been allowed to be hers. He had given her the one thing that no one ever had, the room to become. Now he stepped close, and his voice dropped low, meant only for her. "Do you have any idea," he murmured. What it is you just did? Wren looked up at him, suddenly uncertain, the way she always was when the moment passed and the weight of it caught up to her. I let them live. Maybe. Maybe that was weak. Maybe a real queen would have. You did far more than let them live. His midnight eyes were full of something vast and tender and almost reverent. You broke a cycle that has ruled our kind since long before the first stones of this keep were ever laid. Strength over weakness, fear over mercy. Cruelty answered always with more cruelty. Every alpha I have ever known would have answered this night with blood. Every one, even me. He shook his dark head slowly. Especially me. He lifted his hand, the one that had been burned by the silver bolt, the skin she had healed with her own touch, and he cupped her cheek, the way he had before, careful and unhurried and full of wonder. And you stood in the middle of the worst night of your entire life, with the power in your hands to destroy every soul who had ever hurt you. And you chose to heal them instead. Do you understand how rare that is? How impossibly, beautifully rare? He held her gaze. That is what a true queen is, Wren. Not the strongest wolf in the room. Any brute can be the strongest. It is the one who is wise enough to understand what strength is actually for. And this time, when his hand touched her face, Wren did not simply allow it. She leaned into it. She turned her cheek into his palm, and she closed her eyes, and she let herself rest there, just for a moment, against the warmth of someone who had chosen, again and again and again, to be gentle with her when he had every reason and every right not to be. It was the smallest thing in all the world, and it was everything, because no one ever truly chooses the very first time. Trust is not a single moment that arrives all at once. It is 1,000 small choices, each one a little less frightening than the last, and this was hers, freely given, wholly her own. The girl who had once fled from a single look across a crowded hall, now resting, unafraid, in the open hand of a king. Thorn felt it through the bond, and something in him that had been clenched tight his entire hard life finally, quietly, let go. Take all the time in the world, he murmured, a promise he intended to keep for as long as she ever needed to hear it. And Wren, for the very first time, smiled up at him. I know, she said softly. There is no rush. We have time now. We have time. After a whole lifetime measured out in survived days, in endured nights, in the simple and desperate arithmetic of making it to one more cold morning, she had time, a whole life of it, unrolling out ahead of her like fresh snow. And for once, looking at all of it, she did not feel afraid. Later, when the dead had been carried gently out and the broken hall had been swept and cleared, Wren stood at one of the high windows of the keep and looked out over the snow. The mountains stretched white and silent beneath a sky thick and heavy with stars. The same cold peak she had hauled water through until her hands bled. The same frozen ground she had bled on more times than she could remember. The same vast, indifferent world that had looked at her and called her useless and broken and nothing at all. It had not changed. Not one stone of it. She had. She caught her own reflection in the dark window glass, silver hair falling down like spun moonlight, the ring of luminous violet around each eye, the straight spine, the lifted chin, The smooth, unmarked skin where 18 years of scars had been. But it was not the changes to her body that held her gaze. It was the eyes. They held the world now instead of hiding from it. Steady, level. A gaze that had stopped asking permission to exist. The eyes of someone who had finally stopped waiting to be hurt. That was the real transformation. Not the silver fur. Not the ancient and terrible power sleeping in her chest. Not the crown that would surely come. It was a girl who had been told every single day of her life that she was worth nothing at all. Learning, at the very last, that she had been worth everything all along. That her worth had never once depended on what the pack could see. On whether she had a wolf or a scent or a use that someone could wring out of her. It had been there the entire time, buried beneath the cruelty, the way a wolf had been buried beneath a curse, waiting in the dark, patient, whole, hers. No one had given it to her tonight. She had only, finally, been allowed to find it. Thorn came to stand beside her at the window. He did not speak. He did not need to. He simply stood there, his shoulder warm against hers, and looked out at the same cold and beautiful mountains, and Wren reached out, without looking, and found his hand in the dark, and held it. Her choice, freely made. "They will come back," she said quietly, after a long while. "The ones in the cloaks, the hunters. They said there were more of them, many more." "They will," Thorn agreed, his voice low and steady. "And when they do, we will be ready for them, together, whatever names they have, wherever they hide." Wren nodded slowly, and she found that she was not afraid of that, either. Whatever waited out there in the dark, whatever old enemies, whatever ancient grudges, whatever new battles still to come, she would meet them all standing up, the way she had learned tonight to meet everything. But that was tomorrow's burden, and tomorrow could wait. Tonight, the keep was quiet. The cruelty was over. The frightened, hopeful wolves of a broken pack were beginning, for the very first time in their hard lives, to imagine a different kind of world, a different kind of strength. And a girl who had been a shadow for 18 long years stood now in the light of a high window, holding the hand of someone who truly saw her, with a whole wide life of time spread out before her like the snow. Somewhere far below, down in the kitchens she had once scrubbed on her bleeding knees, a fire was being lit. She could feel the faint warmth of it beginning to climb up through the old cold stone. Warmth spreading slowly into a place that had known far too little of it for far too long. And Wren watched the snow fall over the mountains, silver in the starlight, soft and endless and clean. And for the first time in her entire life, she was not waiting for anything to be over. She was not bracing for the next blow. She was not counting the hours until morning. She was not making herself small or quiet or invisible. She was simply, finally, quietly home.